In its very last decision of its term, the highest court in the land handed future presidents a, quote, loaded weapon, in the words of a dissenting justice, aimed straight at the rule of law in the country. The conservative 6-3 majority of the court, half of them appointed by ex-President Donald Trump, two others having faced calls for their recusal in this very case, dealt a potentially fatal blow to special counsel Jack Smith's effort to hold the ex-president accountable for crimes committed on January 6th at the insurrection and his plot to overturn the 2020 election he lost. They ruled that Donald Trump and all future presidents are entitled to immunity for official acts that they take during their presidency. To that now infamous question of whether a president can order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, the United States Supreme Court said, in effect, yeah, maybe. Regarding Jack Smith's prosecution of Donald Trump, the court is sending that case back to Judge Tanya Chutkan to parse out what is an official act in which Trump is entitled to complete immunity and what is not an official act. And the majority opinion says this, quote, in dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives. You mean like the coup? Going on, Chief Justice Roberts writes this, quote, this case is the first criminal prosecution in our nation's history of a former president for actions taken during his presidency. Determining whether and under what circumstances such a prosecution may proceed requires careful assessment of the scope of presidential power under the Constitution. The nature of that power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office, at least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers. This immunity must be absolute. As for his remaining official actions, he's entitled to at least presumptive immunity. What this amounts to, according to the three dissenting Supreme Court justices, is that Donald Trump is above the law. Writing for the court's three liberal justices, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, issuing a primal scream kind of warning for her colleagues, saying they have dramatically and dangerously expanded the power of the presidency, creating a, quote, law-free zone around the president. From her scorching dissent, quote, the president of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate criminal law. Moving forward, however, all presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide by will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent, end quote. That's where we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Heaphy's here. Voting rights attorney, founder of the site Democracy Docket, Mark Elias is here. The senior editor for Slate, the host of the Amicus podcast, Dahlia Lithwick, is here. With us at the table, former top official at the Department of Justice and MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann is here. Andrew Weissmann.
So I'd like to pick up on the part that you were reading from Justice Sotomayor, because she talks about this parade of horribles. And one of the things that was so revealing is Justice Roberts does not address them. He does not talk about how the test that the majority opinion lays out in any way would give us any comfort that there's a problem. So that the using SEAL Team 6, he just says these are fanciful. He doesn't in any way say why this test of if it's official conduct, it's immune, why everything that Justice Sotomayor is saying is not completely something to worry about. And wait, there's more. The majority opinion says, with respect to the Department of Justice, that part of the criminal case that was brought by Jack Smith is out. Why? Because that is under the take care clause of the Constitution. That is exclusively within the president's power. And so even where there is a sham prosecution, he is immune. Just think about it for a minute. The relationship of the president to the Department of Justice is, even if the president knows and the allegation is it's a sham case, immune.
So let me ask you about things that already happened, because they also seem to write in a hypothetical manner when all of the hypotheticals have in some ways inched toward coming to pass. Donald Trump sought to prosecute Hillary Clinton and Jim Comey and others as early as 2017. New York Times broke the story in early 2018 or late 2017. Don McGahn serves as a guardrail against those prosecutions. What does this mean if there's no Don McGahn in a second Trump presidency and he proceeds with doing that?
So the people who are not immune would be the people under the president. They don't enjoy presidential immunity.
But Sotomayor writes about pardons.
Exactly. So there's a.
That's already happened too. I mean,
yes.
There was reporting in the New York Times that he sought to shoot people at the border, and he promised the Border Patrol Agency that
yes.
he would give them pardons.
Right. So the normal check, cut the word normal. The president, under this decision, can use the Department of Justice as a weapon and is immune. They have taken that part of the case out, even as they say the allegation is it's a sham. I mean, imagine the hypothetical I've been posing today is, imagine that there's a tape recording of the president saying, bring a fake case against my political rival. I know there's no proof, just bring it and I want him prosecuted. Under this decision,
well, we have that too in The Perfect Call.
Yes,
we have against an ally.
Absolutely. This is not so much of a hypothetical, and the only check would be, which was discussed during the oral argument, would be that the lower level people would not enjoy immunity. But you already have the president saying, "But don't worry about it. I will commit crimes for me because I will pardon you for it." So this is just it is. This, I'm going to quote from Nicole Wallace, which is, this is like the Sixth Sense, which is, the Supreme Court in Russia exists, but none of us think that there's a rule of law there. When you look at this opinion, it
just doesn't know it. Yeah,
exactly.
Mark Elias, we should pull the curtain back on what's actually happening, shouldn't we? People are exploring options to live in other countries if they think they could be targeted for prosecution by Donald Trump, because targeting you or targeting me or targeting Andrew would be an official act based on today's decision.
Yeah, I mean, they could target for criminal prosecution. They could target for administrative investigation, the IRS, the SEC, the EPA. Under this opinion, they could even, engage in physical violence or assassination. And all of that is terribly, terribly troubling in the abstract. But Nicole, we're not in the abstract. We're in the reality. And the reality is that Donald Trump has said that if he is elected, he will seek retribution. He has said that if he is reelected, he will be a dictator for at least a day. And there is a team of MAGA extremists who are working on something called Project 2025 and related things to execute and make much more effective Donald Trump's retribution if and when he gets into office. This will not be Nixon's enemies list of a few hundred. This will be Donald Trump's enemies list of several tens of thousands, and the federal government will be his tool from start to finish.
This court constructive monstrosity is where we start the hour. with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former Senator, co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, our friend Claire McCaskill is back. Plus, the founder and executive director of Protect Democracy, Ian Bassin, is back. Professor of history at NYU, author of Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present, Ruth Ben-Ghiat is here. With us at the table, former assistant U.S. attorney, president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Maya Wiley, is here. Ruth, I regretted on Friday at 5:50 when you said the most profound thing in 2 hours that I hadn't started with you. So I'm going to try not to repeat my own mistakes, and I'm going to start with you. Your reaction.
So it's as though these far-right activists on the court made this ruling and all the rulings they've been making with the autocratic playbook in one hand and Project 2025 in the other. And of course, there's a lot of overlap between the two. And, you know, authoritarianism at root is about taking rights away from the many, and that's Dobbs, and also there's voting rights that come into play, and allowing the few, the cronies, the oligarchs, the leader most of all, to have no checks or fewer regulations on their lawlessness. So it's about transforming the rule of law into rule by the lawless. And so removing immunity from the head of state is the autocrat's fantasy. It's why Trump admires Xi Jinping and Putin and all those autocrats, because that's his fantasy, because he is so corrupt. So it's really unspeakable. And it's the product of these far-right activists who are using the court to, you know, destroy democracy from within.
You know, Ian, wondered if we read this wrong. I look or cover the slide toward autocracy in the context of the Republican Party's acquiescence to Trump's authoritarian impulses and affinity for Orban and Xi and Putin. But maybe the Supreme Court is ahead of the political actors. What's your thought?
Well, I think both of those sets of actors are in a completely untenable and outrageous place. This decision is an absolute insult to the birthday of the country coming up this week. But I do agree with Neil Katyal that while this is a devastating legal victory for Trump, it also could be a political liability. In this way, the Supreme Court has now said that he would be immune if he were to order the assassination of a political rival. And in fact, one of Trump's top former officials, Alyssa Mills, said that in meetings in the White House, Trump mused about doing such things. The Supreme Court has now essentially ruled that Trump would be immune if he were to attempt a coup using the mechanisms of the Oval Office. And of course, he's already tried that as well. So this is fundamentally an affront to the American people. And like other decisions of this completely out of hand Supreme Court could actually generate the kind of backlash that could serve as a political check on Trump. That doesn't make it a good decision. It's a horrible decision, but that does provide some pathway about how we, the people, might do something about this. Because here's the thing. Petty mob bosses rig vending machines to steal the quarters, but big-time mob bosses capture the courts in order to maim and steal with impunity. Trump is trying to become that latter one, and not just as a mob boss, but as a dictator. And those are his words, not mine.
Ian, what is the best way at this juncture? I mean, I think that was the analysis after Dobbs, that you don't need a political campaign. Everyone with a uterus or who knows someone with one understands the impact of Dobbs. What is presidential immunity is a little different. It's if you're not, it literally doesn't apply to anyone except a president. Who has that conversation with the country and make sure that what you're saying is true, that the backlash becomes a political liability for Trump?
Well, look, I think one of the reasons we're in the democracy crisis we are in right now to begin with is because for most of the 21st century, what the American people have witnessed is that the powerful seem to be able to get away with anything, but those who play by the rules and work hard are the ones who pay the consequences when things don't work well. That lack of accountability by the powerful has been a galvanizing political force over the last 15 to 20 years. And right now, the one person who is benefiting most from a system in which the powerful are not held to account when they violate the rules is Donald Trump and the president. And I think that is a fairly simple thing for people to understand. If you'd done what he'd done, you'd be in jail for it. But different rules apply to him. And if you don't like that, don't vote that way.
Claire, let me read a little bit more, or let me read again from Justice Sotomayor's dissent, which is, I've read it about 6 times. I can't get through it without having all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'm going to read it again. The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king, above the law. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide by will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent.
Listen, I'm really angry and I'm scared. And let me start with scared. I disagree slightly with Ian because I worry that voters will not fully comprehend what the Supreme Court just handed Donald Trump. This trial is not going to occur before the election. And frankly, the lower court sorting out official acts from non-official acts, making sure you can't use any official acts to prove motive, making sure that the evidence of any official acts that would go towards the crime can't be admitted. But all of that will happen after, it will all come to rest after November 2nd. And I wish I believed that voters would understand that their power it was taken away. Their freedom was taken away in Dobbs. This is a whole nother level of power grabbing from the people that the court has just done. Now, angry. The nerve of these guys to talk about being textualist, talk about, I mean, the lengths that Thomas went to say that for gun regulations, there had to be something about domestic violence in the founding document. And then they do this when the entire premise of our country was to make sure there was never a king. The entire premise of why we exist is to give power to the people and not to a president. So I'm angry at these hypocrites. This is the most activist court I have ever seen. And I'm a student of the law. I've been a lawyer all my adult life. This is an activist court above all activist courts. And the notion that they want to dress themselves up in federalist bullshit, that somehow they are not activists and that they are not bending the law to their political will is horse hockey. And I just, it makes me so angry. And frankly, just as scared, because this is really a pivotal moment in our country. And now it feels like the last week, it has just kind of come unfrayed, and it worries me very, very much.
You've thrown down the bullshit gauntlet. Claire, I'm going to need you to say a little more.
Well, I mean, I sat and listened and had these guys come in my office, you know, asking for my vote for confirmation. And I've listened to the Republicans. I've listened to the Yale and Harvard graduate Republicans talk about, you know, we can't rewrite from the bench. We can't do things the founding fathers didn't want us to do. We can't have a court legislating. Look what this court has done out of whole cloth. I mean, the idea that they're acting like somehow a president was chilled from not being able to use their authority and power when they've watched what Donald Trump has done. He wasn't chilled. He couldn't wait to try to rip up the Constitution. and deprive the country from a peaceful transfer of power. He couldn't wait to find false electors and try to do things that had never been contemplated in our country before. He wasn't chilled. He was, let's go for it. And they're using the fact that somebody might be chilled when the evidence of somebody needing to be checked is right in front of them in the indictment they're considering in a case. It's crazy. And that's why I'm saying they're making this stuff up. They're just making it up.
Dissent. Again, it's a fork in the road moment. Sometimes it's hard to feel that in a cable news cycle, but when I read her dissent, I felt it. And I want to ask you if this provides an alternate history for Nixon. I mean, why would Nixon have had to leave office? It sounds like he could have gotten away with all that, and quoting Sotomayor, and more.
Exactly right. He was pardoned because he attempted to interfere with an FBI investigation of the Watergate break-in. And the acknowledgement implicit in the pardon and his acceptance of the pardon is that he violated the law and could be prosecuted. Under the court's test articulated today, the executive's, the president's supervision of the Justice Department, including the FBI, is core protected the prerogative of the president. That would be immune. That's why Justice Sotomayor, understandably, is so exercised about this and talks about a fork in the road. Right? The court identified this 3 categories: core conduct, exclusive province of the president, things like the conduct of foreign affairs or the pardon authority. And the other extreme is purely personal things, well beyond his status as president, a very small category. The real ball game here, Nicole, is in the middle. It's stuff that is arguably official, and there's a presumption that that will be immune. And the court doesn't really give lower courts much help in what it takes to rebut that presumption. They essentially says it can be rebutted if there's the prosecution shows no danger or intrusion of the authority and functions of the executive branch. I don't even know what that means. So Judge Chutkan and other judges have to sort out if something is potentially official, does it interfere? Would prosecution of it interfere somehow with the functioning of the executive branch? That's why there's not a lot of confidence, and Justice Sotomayor is correct, that that's not going to lead to a lot of bad behavior that is outside the realm of criminal prosecution.
Congresswoman, you are by name and by participation in the January 6th Select Committee, which the convicted felon, ex-president, Republican candidate, currently leading in the polls, calls the Unselect Committee. He's targeted the Committee for Prosecution. Are you nervous?
No, I'm not nervous. I'm nervous for our country. As you know, I'm sure the Constitution provides that members of the Congress cannot be held to answer for their legislative acts anywhere else. It's the only actual immunity provided for in the Constitution. Trump today on his Truth Social said that the January 6th committee members should be arrested. Then he suggested that there should be military tribunals, specifically with a picture of Liz Cheney. And if you take a look at what the court's decision is today, that he would violate the law and the Constitution appears to be okay with them. They have created we're 3 days short of the 248th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And they have trashed that today with creating an imperial presidency that our forefathers overturned. They didn't want a king. I don't want one either. And I think, voters have an opportunity to prevent this guy from becoming the authoritarian leader that he has told us he wants to be. But we also have a problem with this court that we've got to grapple with. How do we address this? The next president probably is going to appoint 3 justices. And so if Mr. Trump is not elected, there'll be some opportunity to get back to the center away from this extremism in the court. They have shown a propensity, this court, to just completely overturn willy-nilly long-standing precedents. The next court may need to do that to get us back firmly into the center where we were before these extremists were appointed to our highest court.
This court has taken away a constitutional right for the first time in our country's history. This court, in their opinions agreeing with that removal of a right, made clear that marriage equality is in its sights of the super conservative supermajority. This court will probably look at IVF. Every family that exists because of the miracle of IVF is in jeopardy. This court has said today that an American president is a king, an absolute FU to the founders, as the Congresswoman says, 3 days before the nation's birthday, making a mockery of my favorite ever musical, Hamilton. This court has its lowest approval rating in history. This court decided, as Dahlia Lithwick said, to let all this go down without any audio recording of it. Why?
The other thing I will add is I'm old enough to remember that when the Supreme Court ruled that Nixon had to turn over the tapes, that you thought, okay, this is the rule of law, and that this truly is a president is subject to the law. They're a citizen sort of first. It is by no means clear that Nixon decision would come out the same way. In fact, it's completely antithetical to the reasoning here, which is the court saying, oh, no, we don't even want to allow any sort of criminal look or even
Would the
use
Mueller
of
investigation
evidence.
exist? Does the special counsel law exist?
Well, to the extent that the president, to the extent that he's doing something as a candidate before his presidency, yes, you can still look at that. But any sort of conduct while he's president, sort of like the firing of Jim Comey in saying that the purpose was to avoid a prosecution, that's off the table. They're going to say, no, he has absolute immunity with respect to who he chooses and who he doesn't, even if it's done for an illegal purpose. They're like, no, that is off the table. And I think Nixon would be decided differently because they'd say, you know what, tapes that have to do with conversations between the president and the people who are advising him, off the table. So this is really, it's hard to understate the import of this decision in terms of our democracy.
Judge, I don't know if you'll be pleased or displeased that I say this, but on the day that we learned that the Supreme Court would hear immunity, you were at this table. It was my second day back from leave, and you basically laid out exactly how this would play out, including the timing and day that they would issue this decision and how they would decide. I'm curious about how you knew that would be the case, but I'm more interested in your views on what the practical consequences are should Trump return to power.
Thank you, Nicole, for having me with you this afternoon. As you said, this is indeed an historic day in constitutional history, as well as for the nation. Today's decision represents what I have called, as you know, the unsouling of America. America's democracy and rule of law are this country's heart and soul. Our democracy and the rule of law are what have made America the envy of the world and the beacon of freedom to the world for almost 250 years now. Today, the Supreme Court cut that heart and soul out of America, holding that the former president is immune from prosecution for any of his actions in and around January 6th, taken in his so-called official capacity as President of the United States. No longer can it be said that in America, no man is above the law. Today, our Supreme Court held that the President of the United States, and particularly the former President of the United States, is in fact above the law. Nicole, before today, no one has ever even thought that a president would be absolutely immune from prosecution from crimes he committed against the United States of America while in office. And that is all the court had to say to decide this case today. Instead, the court decided for all times, purportedly, that a president is absolutely immune from prosecution for any and all crimes he commits in his official capacity while in office. This is a shocking decision from our Supreme Court. There is no support whatsoever in the Constitution or even in the Supreme Court's precedents for the past 200 years for this reprehensible decision by the Supreme Court. Needless to say, the decision is irreconcilable with America's democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law.
The distressing thing, those of us who are, all the lawyers are also considered officers of the court, and we're trained to believe in the impartiality of especially the Supreme Court. And I've got to say, our faith has been shaken. They look corrupt. The process used to appoint them was rigged, and they appear to be partisan hacks. And it's really a very distressing situation for our American democracy.
That was Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren right here in this program 2 months ago, warning about what became our tragic new reality today, our new normal. The Supreme Court targeting openly the rule of law in America, effectively killing any chance of legal accountability for an ex-president who tried to overthrow an election, a free and fair one, deemed so by his own administration, ahead of the next election 4 months from now, one in which he is ahead in most polls. Joining our coverage, former January 6th Select Committee member, Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. Tim and Andrew are still with us. Congresswoman, your reaction?
Well, I had feared something like this. The court has basically turned its back on the proud history of our country, where no man is above the law. You know, we overthrew a king a few hundred years ago, and they have taken steps to allow absolute immunity for the president for what they declare as official acts, which is basically, from what they've said, probably anything he does, although they give lip service to unofficial acts. I mean, they basically had said anything the president says and does is within the penumbra of his official acts. That's not what the Constitution says. It's not what the founders intended. It's not what our democracy needs. These guys are extremists, really. They're extremists with a political agenda, and it's very disturbing.
I mean, here are the official acts that we know about because of news accounts. I mean, he sought to pardon border officials if they broke the law to get them to do what he wanted. He extorted Zelensky to get him to dig up dirt on the Bidens. He did nothing while his supporters sought to, quote, hang Mike Pence and beat law enforcement officials with flagpoles and other weapons. What do you imagine, having spent days and weeks and months investigating his first administration through the eyes and ears of his last administration officials, what do you envision for a second term should the polls as they are today hold up and he prevail?
Well, he's been very open about what he intends to do, and that's retribution. He himself said last December he intends to terminate parts of the Constitution. He didn't say which parts, but apparently the court is going to give him wide range to terminate whatever he wants. You know, he summoned a mob to Washington, knowing they were armed. He sent them to the Capitol to try and prevent the peaceful transfer of power. If that's okay, we've got a problem in this country. And certainly in the debate the other night, he would not commit to accepting the election results this November unless he won. So we've got a problem here. If he cannot be accountable, if any president cannot be held accountable under the laws that exist, that's a complete departure from our history. I guess, you know, theoretically, President Biden, acting within the scope of his official duties, could dispatch the military to take out the conservative justices on the court, and he'd be immune. Think so?
You know, Mark Elias, it was clear, I think, on before January 6th, I would say in November of 2020, when Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy made the ultimately lethal decisions to let Donald Trump cry it out instead of saying our names were on the ballot too. The election was free and fair. Lifelong Republican Chris Krebs said so. Close the book. Bye. Thank you for your service. We put in motion a slide toward autocracy that very few people recognize. You did, and it's why we seek your wisdom and counsel all the time. And then I think we missed all the signs that the Supreme Court, in abandoning its own under oath testimony to honor precedent when it came to Roe, when it did the opposite, we weren't really set up for gaslighting from the Supreme Court. And then when Ginny Thomas first and Mrs. Alito second, proudly and brazenly associated, not just with the cause of the insurrection, but the iconography, right? The symbolism of the insurrectionists themselves. We continue to sort of play our violins on the deck of the Titanic, and I wonder when we'll start talking about the iceberg.
Yeah, and I think that we run the risk, even on a day like today, of overly lawyering and legalizing what the Supreme Court has done. Let's be clear. The Supreme Court, as you know, you've heard, they knew exactly what they were doing, not just for the past, but for the future. Donald Trump is campaigning on a platform of being a dictator for a day and of seeking vengeance against his enemy. And you know, to do that, he needs the support of a lot of people who are going to go along with him. Well, what have those people who have gone along with him learned in the last couple of weeks? Number one, that the U.S. Supreme Court was going to narrowly construe a statute that went after January 6th insurrectionists. Number two, the Supreme Court was going to let Donald Trump remain on the ballot. Number three, that the Supreme Court was going to give him basically absolute immunity, not just for what he did last time, but what he may do in the future. And that his pardon power is absolute. So let's be clear. It's not just that the Supreme Court knew what it was doing with respect to the criminal cases that have been indicted. The Supreme Court knows what it's doing with respect to empowering his attitudes and his impulses and those of his followers as we are 4 months from the next election, 4.5 months from the next set of lawsuits, 5 months from the next insurrection at the Capitol, and then potentially 4 years of him seeking vengeance and misusing power to go after his political opponents and to prosecute his case against the American people. It is a shameful day for democracy. The court has disgraced itself. And I'll tell you, every one of us needs to be steeled for a battle to stand up for the rule of law going forward.
Can I just ask you one last question, Mark Elias? In your view, why?
Because they agree with him. You know, one of the things that has always struck me as odd in this town is that people look at a bunch of justices and they say, well, you know, they all went to Harvard and Yale Law School and they all went to the best colleges and they send their kids to the same schools that our kids go to. And, you know, they enjoy a glass of wine with a coup d'etat at a reception at the Supreme Court and they wear robes and they speak in very flowery language. They're just like us. No, they actually believe that Donald Trump is the future of America. They believe that the flag should be flown upside down, indicating distress when Joe Biden wins. They believe that Donald Trump, as a strong man, should have immunity. And it's time that, you know, people who are in the center left, the center right, stop looking at justices and thinking, well, they must share our value system. They don't share our values system. They share his value system.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.